Major cities across the United States have been gripped by another night of protests decrying police brutality following the killing of an unarmed black man.
There's a point of being policed where we just reach our wits' end, and this is our wits' end.
Thousands of people also gather in London to protest against the killing of George Floyd. Dozens of cities across the United States are bracing for another night of unrest after cleaning up streets strewn with broken glass and burned out cars as curfews failed to quell confrontations between protesters and police. This follows the death of an unarmed black man in police custody last week. President Trump's national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, has rejected a suggestion that there is systemic racism in the US police. An ex-Minneapolis policeman has been charged with the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis on Monday. In Kentucky, officers threw fireworks. Elsewhere, police in riot gear charged at demonstrators and rubber bullets were used in many cities. Barbara Plett-Usher reports from Minneapolis.
Another night of chaos and unrest as anger over police killings spread to every corner of the country. Penetrating the heart of political power in Washington, D.C., security agents used tear gas to push protesters away from the White House. New York's iconic streets were littered with the debris of rage over the death of George Floyd, but also giving vent to years of festering frustration with police mistreatment of African Americans. Here and in more than a dozen other cities, protesters and looters ignored curfews. Security forces rounded them up, fighting to restore order. Nearly a third of the arrests took place in Los Angeles. In Minneapolis, where the protests began, the National Guard moved with military precision to clear demonstrators away from a police station, firing tear gas and rubber bullets, setting up roadblocks throughout the city and shutting down movement.
We're the press, we're media!
Security forces have been aggressively pushing back the protesters. They came determined to make sure that this night would be different than the others, to retake the streets. We've seen a real show of force here tonight. Earlier in the day, protesters marched peacefully, chanting, "I can't breathe," the words of George Floyd as a police officer knelt on his neck to restrain him. Most don't support the violence, but some say without it, their voices aren't heard.
We've been silent for too long. We've been peaceful. How many peaceful protests do we have to have until it gets right? So, yes, I feel like it needed to happen.
There's a point of being policed where we just reach our wits' end, and this is our wits' end.
This is a war, and they're not just stepping back and allowing us to win.
They see this as a pivotal moment in a long struggle for racial justice. But the country is walking a dangerous line between protest and anarchy, confrontation and aggression, battering the space to find answers to the unrest. Barbara Plett-Usher, BBC News, Minneapolis.
The lawyer acting for the family of George Floyd has been speaking to the CBS Face the Nation program, saying that he didn't understand why all the police officers involved in the incident had not been arrested. He argued that the killing was done with intent.
Over 8 minutes, almost 9 minutes, he kept his knee in a man's neck that was begging and pleading for breath. At what point does it not be about detaining a man who's face down with handcuffs, not posing any threat to an intentional will to cause bodily harm?
Just want to show you some pictures of the latest protests. Let's have a look first at Boston in Massachusetts, an aerial shot of a protest carrying on there. We've seen several hundred protesters, some of them walking, keeping their space there in Boston. That's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon there. Let's take you now to the West Coast, where it's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. This is Santa Monica in California, where you saw a police line on the left, and as the helicopter zooms on the right, you can see several hundred people there gathered stationary in a square, continuing those protests. And at the most recent count, there have been protests in 75 different cities across the United States. Thousands of protesters also took to the streets in New York, setting police vehicles on fire in some areas. The state governor has announced an inquiry into police conduct during the protests.
George Floyd must not have died in vain. Mr. Floyd's killing must be a moment in which this nation actually learned and grew and progressed to make this place a better place. And we can do it if we are smart together.
Well, during a protest for George Floyd on Saturday, a sheriff in Genesee County, Michigan, took the decision to walk alongside protesters. In videos that have been viewed over 4 million times on Twitter, Sheriff Christopher Swanson was encouraged by protesters to walk with them, which he then did. Sheriff Swanson has been in the police force for more than 2 decades. He joins us now. Sheriff, we didn't get to hear your voice in the quick pictures we just saw, so I wonder if you'd like to tell our viewers what you said to those protesters.
You know, when you walked down, you saw so much rage and so much anger. And my first instinct was, I want to find out what they need us to do. And I went right to what we call the shot caller or the organizer. I embraced them and I said, you tell me what I need to say. What do I need to do? And I said, that officer is not who we are. And he turned, he said, tell the people. I said, get their attention. And he got their attention, and I called it out because wrong is wrong. And after they heard that message from law enforcement leadership, I said, what else do you need? And that's when the crowd hollered, walk with us. And they continued, and that was the change agent that turned this around to make that night historic. Walk with us.
We're often used to seeing sheriffs, police officers in almost military gear. But you made a conscious decision not to have body armour. Your officers, you told them their batons were down. The impact of that is obviously quite powerful.
Not only did I take my helmet off and we lowered our batons, but that sent a psychological message that we are not here to create an enemy or a fight. That's why they're there in the first place. And when they saw that action, especially in a crowd that's so passionate, that was the turning point. So yes, it was probably the worst tactical decision I could ever make, but the risk was not one that I was going to even think about. The benefit far outweighed that, and it turned out to be a historic evening by that one action.
What are your thoughts about what happened last Monday when you saw those pictures of George Floyd?
Well, I can tell you, any good police officer in the world doesn't need to look at any more than 8 minutes and 46 seconds to come to a conclusion that's not who we are. When someone's handcuffed, when the fight is over, it's over. And when you put your knee on the back of a neck and you do that while the guy is pleading for his life, pleading for his mother, the crowd is pleading, it's horrifying, it's disgusting, and that's why those that are there last night were enraged. And shame on me for not coming out sooner, because you can't make a wrong or right.
Sheriff Chris Swanson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.